Throughout history, humanity has radically changed the way it lives, thinks, and organizes itself. It has not been a straight or peaceful road. On the contrary, it has been a series of shocks that turned everything upside down. And yes, there have been key moments, turning points that completely changed the course of our species. We went from hunting on the savanna to planting wheat, from telling stories around the fire to writing them on tablets, from making things by hand to producing them by the millions, from sending letters by ship to sending messages in seconds. And now we may be entering a new era in which machines not only work for us, but also think. But why did these changes happen? What made them possible? How did they affect people's lives, the economy, power, and society? In reality, understanding these 5 major turning points of the human species is understanding how we got here and where we might be going next. For most of our history, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. They moved from place to place following animals, gathering fruit, roots, fish, or honey. They had no permanent homes, no fields, no cities. They lived in small groups that shared what they obtained and rarely accumulated possessions. But all of that began to change around 12,000 BC, in what we now know as the Fertile Crescent. This region covered parts of Iraq, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Turkey, and Iran. There, some communities began to cultivate cereals systematically. The same thing happened with certain animals such as sheep, goats, and pigs, which stopped being hunted and began to be domesticated. This transformation did not happen overnight, nor did it happen the same way all over the world. In fact, it also developed independently in other regions, such as China with rice, Mesoamerica with corn, and the Andes with potatoes. In many other places, however, it arrived through population movements. But in every case, it meant the same thing, a complete change in lifestyle. So why did this change happen? Scientists believe it was the result of a combination of climate changes at the end of the last ice age, which restricted or reduced resources, and population growth. Simply gathering or hunting was no longer enough. A way to produce more food had to be found, and agriculture offered exactly that. Of course, farming was not easier than hunting. On the contrary, it required much more work, clearing land, planting, watering, protecting crops. But it had one huge advantage: surplus. For the first time, it became possible to produce more food than a person needed to survive. And that changed everything. With more food, some people could begin devoting themselves to things other than gathering or hunting: building, making tools, producing pottery, tending livestock, or organizing the community. The first villages emerged, such as Jericho, which already existed in 9000 BC. Then came the first cities. And with them, private property, hierarchies, taxes, wars over territory, and the first forms of centralized power. It was precisely this more settled, more organized, and more complex life that created a new need: the need to record things. Because once you no longer live only with what you can carry, once you have fields, animals, warehouses, neighbors, and rulers, the need arises to keep records. Who owns what? How much has been produced, what is owed, and what has been paid. And so, a few thousand years after humans began cultivating the land, writing was born, the second great revolution of humanity. Its earliest forms were simple marks, drawings, and accounting symbols used to keep track of stored grain, livestock, or the taxes peasants paid to temples or the palace. One of the earliest known writing systems is Sumerian cuneiform, which emerged around 3200 BC in ancient Mesopotamia, that is, present-day Iraq. Soon afterward, other forms of writing appeared in different parts of the world. In Egypt around 3100 BC, with hieroglyphs. In the Indus Valley around 2600 BC, with symbols we still have not fully deciphered. And later in China and Mesoamerica. The idea was always the same: to put into writing what had previously only been spoken or remembered. Why was writing so important? Because writing allowed us to organize much larger and more complex societies. Thanks to it, laws, contracts, records, censuses, stories, and myths could be written down and preserved over time. Bureaucracy also appeared, meaning people specialized in governing, collecting taxes, counting, and judging. Documents, orders, and archives multiplied, and with them, power also grew. Writing was, in a way, a tool of control, but it was also a gateway to imagination, thought, and science. Babylonian mathematics, Egyptian medicine, and the earliest religious texts were preserved thanks to it. For thousands of years, it made it possible to accumulate and transmit knowledge, and it was that knowledge that allowed civilizations to advance, mastering their environment with ever greater sophistication. But there was a much more recent moment when change stopped being slow and gradual and became a true explosion. That moment was the Industrial Revolution, which began in the late 17th century. Until then, almost everything in the world was done with human or animal power, with simple tools, and on a very limited scale. Societies were mostly agricultural and production was based on craftsmanship. Great empires and international trade already existed, of course. The daily life of most people had not changed much for centuries. That is until the mid-18th century, especially in England. Why England? For several reasons. In short, it had access to large coal deposits, a relatively stable political system, highly profitable colonial trade, available labor, and an entrepreneurial class willing to invest. It was there that inventions began to emerge that completely transformed the way goods were produced. The steam engine, mechanical looms, blast furnaces for smelting iron on a massive scale. In short, for the first time, machines replaced muscle power, and that made it possible to produce more, faster, and at lower cost. The textile industry was one of the first sectors to take off, but it was soon followed by steel, transportation, and later electricity and chemistry. This led to a brutal transformation. Millions of people moved from the countryside to the city in search of work. Modern large urban centers were born. Factories appeared, along with 12 to 14-hour workdays, pollution, and also the first organized working classes. The economy changed forever. It became industrialized, capitalist, based on mass production and consumption. What had once been made by hand was now produced by the thousands or millions. And it was not only the economy that changed. The way we lived, thought, traveled, and worked changed. The whole world changed. Because this revolution did not stay in England. Within a few decades, it spread across Europe, the United States, and then the rest of the planet. New powers, new empires, new forms of inequality, and also new ideas emerged. Socialism, trade unionism, and economic liberalism. And if the Industrial Revolution changed the world with machines, the next great transformation came with computing. Everything began with a completely new type of machine, the computer. During World War II, the first computers were created for very specific tasks, such as breaking codes or performing ballistic calculations. One famous example is ENIAC, created in 1945 and considered one of the first computers capable of carrying out various complex mathematical tasks. These machines were enormous, slow, and very expensive, but they laid the foundations for everything that would come later. In the following decades came transistors, then microchips, and later personal computers. What once took up an entire room could now fit on a desk, and later in a pocket. In the mid-20th century, computing began to merge with another equally powerful revolution, telecommunications. Thanks to radio waves, undersea cables, satellites, and above all the arrival of the Internet, which began in the 1960s as a military project, and became widespread in the 1990s, information started circulating around the world in real time. It was no longer necessary to send letters or wait for the newspaper. Now you could communicate instantly with any part of the planet. The economy also underwent a profound transformation. New sectors appeared, such as software, communications, computing and data, and giants like Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon emerged. There was a shift from physical production to the knowledge economy, where what matters most is no longer what is manufactured, but information and innovation. It is true that many traditional jobs began to disappear, but at the same time new professions were born that had not even existed a generation earlier. And it was not only the economy that changed, our way of life changed. So the internet, smartphones, social media, email, GPS, online commerce, digital banking, All of this has changed how we get information, how we relate to one another, how we shop, how we learn, and even how we fall in love. In just a few decades, the world has gone digital. But even though this may seem like the final point in history, it is not. Because right now we are moving into something even more uncertain. A new leap that goes beyond information and connectivity. A leap in which, for the first time, machines begin to process information, learn patterns, and who knows, maybe one day even think for themselves like humans. And that leap has a name: the artificial intelligence revolution. As we just said, artificial intelligence goes one step further. It seeks to make machines learn, reason, and make decisions on their own. It is not just about automating tasks, but about creating systems capable of adapting and improving over time. Although its theoretical foundations emerged in the second half of the 20th century, artificial intelligence has advanced rapidly over the last 2 decades. This is mainly due to the increase in processing power, the availability of large volumes of data, and the improvement of machine learning algorithms. Today, AI is already integrated into our daily lives. And we see it every day, from virtual assistants and online recommendations, to medical diagnostic tools and autonomous vehicles. But this is only the beginning. Even so, concerns about AI are many, and this technology raises ethical challenges. Who is responsible for a decision made by a machine? How is privacy protected? Could it get out of our control? Be that as it may, humanity does not seem very far from reaching so-called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. This is a hypothetical kind of AI that would possess the capacity to understand, learn, and apply knowledge to any intellectual task that a human being can perform. Unlike current AI, which focuses on specific tasks, artificial general intelligence aims to match or surpass human intelligence across multiple domains. Think about it: a system that becomes more intelligent, faster and faster, within hours or even minutes. This process could lead us to an intelligence that is incomprehensible to us, with capabilities that go completely beyond our predictions. The real question is, what happens when the most powerful intelligence on the planet is no longer human? This radical and unpredictable transformation of society and of our very existence is what we know as the singularity. It could mean that the era of human dominance comes to an end, giving way to something we cannot even begin to imagine. And now that we have seen all this, do you think another revolution will come after AI? What might it be? Or will the world end with that? If this gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. History speaks. Those who listen win. Stay well.